So the great thing about technology is it changes everything, but in huge, sweeping numbers. Imagine 11 trillion. That's the estimated value of linking digital and physical worlds together. 11 trillion. It's not even millions or billions, it's trillions. 1.5 billion is the number of social networkers users globally. And while these numbers and the opportunity is enormous, there's also a gap in terms of the realization. And one of the ones that really strikes me is that only 18%, that's the percentage of the digital potential that we're actually realizing. And so across Salesforce this week, we're going to hear all sorts of things about the digital potential, customer centricity, and all the types of things that make our jobs really fun. And so today what we wanted to share with you, with my friend Maria and I, are what is happening. So if you go from these big megatrends into our world, as heads of sales operations, inside sellers, marketing executives, how do these big numbers and how do all of these exciting changes translate into our day-to-day? And here's the exciting thing. What we see in our research is it's translating into growth. Not just more growth than last year, but more growth than your competitors and beating the market rate of growth. And that is super exciting. So what we're going to do is we're going to share what some of these practices are and what we see companies doing that buck the trends. 4 big concepts we wanted to share with you today. One is sell the way your customers want to buy. It sounds incredibly simple, but we don't do it very often. Most of the time, we're selling the way we want to sell or the way our product or service is configured, not actually experience-oriented. And all too often in the enterprise, it doesn't feel anything like a consumer experience. It's not delightful, it's not joyful, and it's not fun. Second thing is, how do you power your growth through digital sales? How do you harness the potential, what we just talked about in terms of 18% of the potential of digital being realized? How do you bring that into your teams? Well, 2 more that I know Maria has enormous passion for.
The next one is advanced analytics. How are organizations using analytics and data to drive growth and to drive strategies? And it's a topic, a passion of mine, and I'm sure many people in the room share that passion with me. And we're also going to talk about the people. How do you make it real for the sales team? How do you build a top-performing sales force? Because it's not about just the data and the analytics, it's also about building the team. So we'll share some strategies around that as well.
So let's talk about this first idea. I already alluded to it. All too often, we're selling the way we want to sell, the way that our products and services are configured, and not actually the way our customers seek to experience things. And this is actually more important today than it was 5 years ago. And the reason is the expectations for our customers in terms of what they want to experience in their buying process is changing. So not only do we have the double penalty of actually not delivering an experience that's consistent to what they want, their wants and needs and desires are changing. So we're 2 steps behind all too often. But many companies are getting ahead, and there are a couple of things that they're realizing. The first thing that they're realizing is that customers don't always go to you. They actually spend an enormous amount of time outside of the selling relationship they have with you, finding out about you, finding out about your products, experiencing other products, asking their peers. Whether it's in healthcare and they're going to key opinion leaders, whether it's technology and they're part of a CIO roundtable, they're investigating and learning a lot. They might just actually be at their desk, searching online, looking at YouTube videos on how your product works, and making judgments and assessments.
Let's flip one more.
Oops. So I've been telling you things without the data. Hopefully it's more interesting with the data as well. So that's the first thing, is that they're actually searching and learning about you before they actually talk to you. The second thing is that customers, like ourselves, are incredible multitaskers. So I'm a mom of 3, Maria's a mom of 2. We multitask all the time. By no surprise, when we want to buy some IT, when we want to buy farm equipment, if we were buying farm equipment, that is, we would be multitasking in that effort. And so here's the interesting thing on this little data piece. Customers on average will use 6+ channels for purchasing. I don't know what your route to markets look like, but traditionally when I started, there were like 2 or 3. You can buy it direct, you can buy it indirect, maybe you could buy it in an e-store. So they're actually all over the place multitasking as they go through it. And the last thing about the sales experience that's changing and what this data shows is that transparency is the norm. And the place that hits us the most in our day-to-day work is in price transparency. They're expecting price transparency like they have in their consumer lives, and they're expecting transparency about warranties and upgrades and service. And that's probably a very different way in which you've been working with your customers before. And how do you not make that a threat, but something that empowers and differentiates your experience over others? Many of our clients have been scared to be transparent about their price. They always talk about the Progressive insurance commercial and thinking, my God, if that hits our product, that's just not a good thing. That's a scary thing. But in many ways, how can you reframe that to be an exciting thing and get ahead of it? The next piece about our customers is you have to actually meet them where it matters. And this is something, Marie and I were talking about our kids and how much education has changed. And this obviously is not a slide with sales information or data or our surveys. What it is 3 photographs. What the classroom looked like in the 1950s, what the classroom looked like in the 80s when we were growing up, and what the classroom looks like for our kids today. And we just use this analogy, this description to say sales, if we were to take 3 snapshots, is also changing. And all too often, the people that we work with are actually selling like the 1950s. And what's the difference? Well, there are a lot of analogies and a lot of similarities. So one difference is traditionally, the teacher had all the information and posted it to the children in a very linear way, almost like this, right? I'm standing here and you guys are listening to me. But we've changed the way the classroom looks to be in groups, to be collaborative, to be peer groups. So now what you see is customers are asking each other, what do you think? What was that experience like? Would I buy it again? And the other thing that you see in this last picture is technology. And technology isn't something in the back office. It's something in the actual way in which everything happens. And so you see that students are coming into the classroom. They're able to investigate things on their own. They're coming ready to study and learn before. And so in many ways, it's just something that we can relate to, since I think the vast majority of us either have children or know kids and have visited a classroom. And how we grew up is very different from how kids experience it today. Consider how that actually is in the customer setting. Let's talk a little bit about digital. I know Maria and I have a lot of examples that we want to share with you. So we're going to have to hold back and only share 2 of our favorites. And I'll give you a spoiler alert, we're not going to share technology ones, because those are just too easy to do at Dreamforce. So a couple things. What we know is that digital is pervasive. It's affecting all the ways in which we sell. It's really a different route to market. It's a different way to improve the customer experience. We know that from our survey of lots of companies in the US and Europe, thousands, that actually the companies that are embracing digital are growing 5x faster. I don't know what everyone's sales compensation looks like or the incentives that they cascade to their team, but 5x sounds really good to me. It's astounding. But the potential and the actual tends to be a bit different. And what Maria and I know is that whilst companies know and are investing in sales, very few of them feel like they actually know how to catalyze it and operationalize it. And this is a huge potential for all of you, because if you can be one step ahead, you can be one step ahead of your competitors. And when we often talk about go-to-market and digital, one of the first things we ask is, for what purpose? Why would you want to add digital? And there are a couple of different reasons that companies will tell us. One is that they just want to grow their customer base. 2, they want to increase the value. But maybe it's also a productivity play to reduce cost to serve, to actually ramp up customers faster. Or maybe it's a way to protect your market share. Let's talk about a couple of examples that we've seen.
So let me tell you about an example with an industrial company. As Lareina mentioned, you don't expect industrial to be the first movers when we talk about technology. But this company did something, which is Lareina's message from earlier. They actually asked the customers what they wanted. And what the customers said, they said, we want something simple, we want something cheap, we want something easy. But you guys make it too hard for us. It is too hard to do business with you. I do not need technical support. I do not need 100 people to talk to. I do not need all the things you're giving me. Make it simple for me. And this was a segment of the market that it was a price-sensitive segment that the organization had not been able to capture yet. So what they did, they started a completely new business unit with one single channel, the web. What they did, to be able to sell through the one channel, they said, we're going to have very clear and transparent guidelines. There's going to be specific lot sizes, specific payment terms, specific shipping terms, and you cannot go outside that. It was phenomenal. The customers loved it. They were able to recover the investments within 3 months. They were able to capture 15 to 20% savings that then they passed on to the customers. And today, that organization represents 40% of the total organization. So 40% of sales for this industrial company comes from digital, which in the industrial world is a very high number. And I'm sure for many of you here, 40% of revenues from digital is a very high number as well. I think you have another example.
I do. So Marie and I were talking about different examples, and we were trying to find examples that aren't based around software and technology. And so one of the things that we were talking about is a utility company. And some of our colleagues were saying, well, what would a utility company be doing with digital and sales? Like, we get it, utilities would be using digital for back office operations and automation, but how would that affect customer experience? I mean, aren't you just kind of locked in? And we talked about this case, and think about how a customer, if you're in Minneapolis or Chicago or San Francisco, how do you feel about your utilities company? You probably don't feel like it has the best customer service. And the spike when you're really upset is if there's an outage and you have no power and you don't actually get rapid response. Well, that's exactly what this utility company found. And what they did was they decided to actually empower the field rep and change the role of the person in the front line. Almost call it your sales service person. And they gave this person an app where you could actually see, and they could take a photograph of what was the nature of the outage. And that was sent to a newly created inside sales customer care group who looked at it and said, based on 3 characteristics, we think you have a red escalation, a yellow escalation, or a green. And then they would deploy the right type of service. So if it was a really big deal, a whole bunch of people would come within 6 hours. If it was a small deal, it was fixed. So from an operations perspective, huge benefits from a productivity. But what's great about this example is I think this utilities company was saying, my field care rep is different now with digital. It's empowered. This person is at the front of the customer experience. It's taking care of not the entire experience, but a pain point we specifically see affects our NPS and loyalty scores. And they're saying, I need a different inside seller. I need a different capability with a little bit more intelligence to help with this. So these are 2 examples. We have a lot of examples on analytics, so I think we should definitely move there.
So analytics, as I mentioned earlier, it's my passion. I'm sure many of you share that passion with me. However, bringing analytics into sales and driving growth through analytics is actually hard. We spoke to over 1,000 sales executives, and 50% of them mentioned that they're struggling with getting data out of analytics. 50%, think about it. And the reason why they struggle is because there's too much data, and they don't know what to do with so much data. They have a lot of data from a perspective of, we have more customers, insights, touch points, channel partners. And they also have a lot more automation. They have a lot more techniques such as machine learning, as Lareina mentioned earlier. What do you do with all this data? And what we found out that differentiates top performers from the rest is a few things. First of all, everybody uses data to identify the market opportunity. What is the micro pocket of growth, and how do I go after that micro pocket? But what fast growth companies do is they go 2 levels beyond. They actually say within the customer, what is the opportunity within the customer? And even better, at a deal level, what are some deal insights that I can get based on the data? And based on that, I can either assign a different sales resource, I can decide to invest more specialists into the deal, I can decide not to compete, because I have all this data and I believe I'm not going to win the deal. So they are able to bring the data a level down. The second thing they can do, though, that's very, very interesting, is that they make the data available to the sales force. They don't just have data. They bring insights out of the data, and then they bring those insights to the sales force. It's not a black box. It's something that, as a seller, I show up on Monday morning, and I understand what to do differently based on the information you're giving me. And beyond that, they do one more thing, which is they recognize that the field sales force, the inside sales, the channel partners, they have so much information. They truly understand the customers, but it's actually quite fragmented. So they take all those insights from the field, and then they bring it back into corporate. And having the feedback loop of making sure you get insights to the field, and then insights from the field back to corporate, that's actually what makes them very successful. We have a few use cases that we wanted to talk about. The first one, and my favorite one, is predictive analytics. The reason why I like predictive analytics is because it's like having a crystal ball. You can predict what customers are going to need and how they're going to act along their consumer journey. You can predict whether a phone number is going to become a good lead. You can predict whether a proposal is going to have a high probability of converting into a client or not. You can predict what type of products or services a customer is going to need, and you can predict at what price and what pitch they're going to respond better to. You can also predict if somebody's at risk of leaving you. And it's tremendously helpful for the sales force to suddenly have a flag that says you have a customer that's at risk. Go talk to them. It's a lot easier to keep a customer, to retain the account, than to go win it back. And what we've seen predictive analytics applied across the board, we've seen 10 to 15% higher win rates and reduction in attrition by applying predictive analytics. Some of them are very sophisticated, some of them are not that sophisticated, and frankly, they don't all need to be super sophisticated for customers or organizations to be able to take advantage of analytics in the front line.
So Maria took my favorite one, which is predictive analytics. I completely agree with you. This concept that you can have a crystal ball to anticipate either things with your sales force in your marketing organization or customers, it's really, really cool. But oftentimes I have to say, I'm not always spending time with my clients on predictive analytics. It's just too fancy. And for anyone who feels it's too fancy, let me share a couple examples that are a little bit more basic. So I don't know how many people like baseball or how many people like Michael Lewis, but there's a book, Moneyball, that a lot of people in sales always tell me about. And oftentimes people say, isn't there something that we can do that helps us figure out what are our best batters? What are our best catchers? What are some of the basic blocking and tackling things? And so one of the things, in addition to the crystal ball, that's really exciting is how do you actually just take advantage of the data you have in front of you? It's low tech, it's not super exciting, but it can lead to incredibly practical and helpful things. And an example of that would be forecasting. How can you use the data you have to actually have reliable forecasting? And that, if you have hardware equipment, if you're in the machinery, if you have anything with production time, is hugely helpful for your total business because that actually can help with all the cycle time leading up to the production of the products. So forecasting is one. Another one is just coverage. How do you know where to put people? How do you know, based on the data that you have, which are the magic teams? Oftentimes people say, well, I don't know, everyone's just like Maria's sales team. Like, those are the ones that do well, is the ones with Maria. And I always say, well, you can't scale Maria. There must be something beyond that in your sales team. And what we're seeing some companies use is analytics to figure out the heuristics for what are the resume characteristics, the behavioral and talent characteristics of teams that perform better than others. So, quick suggestion is don't leave it to chance to figure out actually what works in your organization. And talking about the team and talking about how you put together a great team, I think really leads to our next piece, which is how do you get the A team?
I work with many sales executives, and I would say that their top priority or top concern is managing their sales force. One of the things that surprises me over and over again is when you look at the performance of salespeople, the variance between top performers and bottom performers is 2 times, 3 times, 7 times, even after you've adjusted for market factors or other factors. Think about it. There's no other area in the organization that has the variability in performance that salespeople do, that sales forces do. It is absolutely huge. Managing that variability has tremendous amounts of value. And we actually believe that half the value of the organization is actually coming from the sales force and from your salespeople. You know, the product, the price, the go-to-market has something to do with it, but the actual sales experience has a lot to do with it as well. So what do top-performing organizations do well? They do a few things. First of all, they know who their top performers are. They know who their top performers are, and they're able to actually identify what are the traits that makes them top performers. Lareina said, you know, it's hard to replicate a sales rep, but I would argue that it's actually something you should aim for. So the second thing, and I think the previous slide, the second thing that they actually do is that they invest in training and capability building. They invest and recognize that the sales manager is a pivotal role, that the sales manager shouldn't spend all the time doing administrative stuff. They should spend over 50% of their time coaching, on the road with salespeople, sitting next to a telesales rep, spending time understanding the channel partners. We need them to understand and be there. They have to be the coach for the reps. They don't have to be administrative people in the back office. So managing and understanding that performance is critical is very, very important. However, it is hard. If you can look at some of the stats here, even top performers struggle with this. Only half of them believe they have the right skills to be successful. As Lareina mentioned earlier, today's world is changing. Organizations are moving from product sales to solution sales. Buyers are becoming more sophisticated. Digital and analytics are changing the game. So if 50% of the organizations feel they have the right talent, you know, what is going to happen as the world continues to evolve? You know, and I don't know how many of you think that you have the right talent for your organization to be successful. We also hear that it's hard to get the right ROI from sales training. Organizations have spent millions of dollars a year on training their sales forces. Yet, when you ask them, was it successful, they cannot answer the question. So let me tell you a case study of a technology company that they were successful. And let me tell you what they did. First of all, they said, we know who our top performers are. Let's understand who they are. Let's understand what are the traits that differentiates them from the rest. In this particular case, it was being extroverted and being curious. That actually made a difference. That was the successful profile. But they also understood the product knowledge. They had very good product knowledge. They understood customer needs. They knew what questions to ask and how to link those questions into their value proposition and put those two together. One more thing not on the slide, they actually figure out what motivated them, and it was career path. And it's something the organization had never thought about, career path for the sales role, but it was critical for the top performers. So why does this matter to you? A few things. First of all, there's no one-size-fits-all top-performing profile that is going to work for you. You have to look within your organization and understand what works for a technology company is not going to work for a pharma company, and it's not going to work for an insurance company. Furthermore, it has to be at the role level. A top performer key account manager, that profile is very different than inside sales account manager. So what do you do with all this information? You think about hiring, as Lareina mentioned earlier. What profiles are you going to hire them? And I know that hiring is a very big pain point. Attrition rates in sales are 25 to 40% depending on the channel. That is absolutely huge. Sales leaders, sales managers spend so much of their time identifying talent, hiring talent, onboarding them. So if you get the right person from the beginning, it's going to make a huge difference. And there is a scientific way to understand who you should be looking for. And then number two, they actually train the skills that matter. You know, going back to not knowing what is the ROI of your sales investment. If you know what are the 3 capabilities that drive performance, you actually can prioritize and focus on those 3 capabilities. Beyond that, you rely on the sales manager. The sales manager needs to know how to coach to individuals on the specific things they need. But the organization as a whole has to prioritize their training. Sales reps many times get overwhelmed with the flavor of the month initiative or the flavor of the month skill. So how do you make it easy for them as well? So with that, you know, this is the, you know, some of the research we found that's been fascinating for us and we wanted to share with you. And, you know, again, we've talked about sell the way the customers want and truly understanding the modern buyer in today's world after all the changes that are happening. We've talked about powering growth of digital sales and how digital can be its own channel, or it could be part of an omni-channel strategy. It could be in the front office, and it can be in back office. And then thinking when and where to invest in digital is absolutely critical, not just investing for digital's sake. We also talked about using smart analytics as a day-to-day life, and the importance of making analytics critical for the frontline seller and actionable to the sales team so that managers can make better decisions with that. And we talked about putting together the A team. What we want to talk now, and Lareina is going to talk more about this, is what does it mean for you? And what does it mean for the different roles within the organization?
You know, when you were just talking about the A team, one of the intrinsic characteristics that I saw a lot of people's eyes pop open for is 85% around curiosity. And it's interesting because normally when we do a performance review of a sales rep or a sales territory leader, we don't really measure their curiosity or ask about it. And if you think about what matters, if we say you need to sell the way that customers want to buy, you need to be curious. You need a seller who's going to ask questions and be curious about how does the customer want to buy versus execute a playbook. And you're going to need digital to actually reach and understand the customer in more granular ways and not always have that in the seat of the account manager. And you're going to need analytics to provide more information and context. And you need an A team. And I think it's really interesting that if you go back and you pivot your talent organization, whether you have 100 sellers or you have 1,500 sellers, how many of them are curious? And then how do you actually inspire that? And that really does lead to what are the implications for all of us? We're here because we love doing sales and marketing. We love being on the revenue side of the business. We love our teams. We have fun doing what we've done. Maybe some of us have started in specific roles, or some of us actually are product developers who've moved over. No matter what your background is, when you go home, you'll be working with your teams. And you may have different sets of roles and different people. And so one of the things that Marie and I have been thinking about is with all of this change, with all of the value that can be unlocked from analytics and digital, and just different expectations, and frankly, a bit of pressure, what does that mean for all the people that we work with? For the head of sales, for the chief revenue officer, I think that digital and analytics require a step back. It requires a step back to think, what are the actual route to markets and what's the sales strategy that's going to take me across the success line over the next 5 to 10 years? It's really easy just to think about the quarter, just to think about I'm 6 weeks to the end of the quarter, 8 weeks to the end of the quarter. Someone has to have a bifocal view, oftentimes the chief sales officer, and thinking about where do we as an organization need to be in 3, 5, 8 years? How curious do we need to be? What are some of the assets and capabilities that will make us distinctive? So I think there's a huge piece around that, and deciding, do you want 40, to your industrial example, do you want 40% of your revenue coming from digital? Is that the right answer? Is it 100%? I think a scary exercise we sometimes do with clients is to say, go check, go on Amazon and see what percentage of your products can be purchased today in a very different way. Oftentimes shocking, don't all try it right now. But I was a bit surprised at certain things you can buy on Amazon, like huge pieces of equipment. In any case, that's this chief sales officer. The companion to that is the chief marketing officer. And this is a role in tremendous flux. If you think about the traditional chief marketing officer, there's a lot of emphasis placed on brand, placed on big events, almost something that feels like this. But if you think about how customers are buying and the types of tools they have, your best marketing teams are analytic gurus. They actually know how to use data and use it for predictive value like nobody's business. They are your insights factory at their best. And think about that. If you're the head of sales ops, you are no longer a taker of IT requirements. You should be setting them. And you should not be in the back office. You need to be in the front office developing the strategy. Because if you think about technology as a dependency, it's probably too late. And so these are just a couple of examples, but even down to the reps, you will see very different inside sales reps going forward. You'll see very different channel leaders. You'll see channel leaders that spend far more time in services and experience than they do in actual shipping and logistics. So this just gives you a preview to say, if you were to think about where these roles look and what your organizations look like in 3 or 4 years, and what all these trends mean, how would you start to make some of those changes today? Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.